Morning, everyone. As usual, for a 9 a.m. panel, I think people are just walking in, but let's get started. So, we live in an age where a lot of things around us, about us, what we do, are decided by algorithms. So what are algorithms? I mean, I hope everybody has a clue as to what algorithms are. Can I have a raise of hands as to whether you know what algorithms are? Okay, that's a fairly good number, so everybody knows. Great, so I don't have to explain it. Okay.
A little bit, maybe.
So, okay, it could be anything from, let's say, a simple algorithm to arrange the names of people sitting in this room on an alphabetical order, to the Google search, to Facebook's news feed, to deciding maybe by travel authorities as to whether a person can fly or not. So the varied ways in which algorithms affect our life on a day-to-day basis is just complex, and it's getting increasingly complex day by day. Now, there is often a thought that, let's say when computers decide, there is an objectivity to it, and there is no subjective element. Okay, if it's a human deciding it, there could be some kind of bias, but if a computer decides it, that's not so. But is that right? Could there be bias as far as decisions by computers are concerned? There is this most often used phrase where you say in computer, you say garbage in and garbage out. So that exactly is the case. It all decides on the algorithms, the data you feed the algorithms. So there could be a lot of bias and a lot of even discrimination because of the algorithms, the way they are structured, maybe because of the persons who wrote the algorithms, how they felt about things, and also because of with all this artificial intelligence, big data, they're all the self-learning algorithms. So it all also depends on the kind of data that is being fed in. So we have a great panel today to discuss all these issues. Starting from my left, we have Vaishali. Vaishali is from Software Freedom Law Center. She's a counselor with the Software Freedom Law Center in India. We have Jyoti Pandey, who is with Electronic Frontier Foundation, again based out of India now. We have Rajat Kumar, who is with FNF, Art, who is again an academician. So we have a mix of people from private sector, academicians, civil society. Virgil will be joining us soon. He is stuck in the traffic, but he is a scientist with Ethereum who are doing like outstanding work on blockchains and all these technologies. So yeah, so let's start with Vaishali. Vaishali, if you could give a brief background of what the issues that we are discussing, what are the issues with algorithms, and what are the transparency issues, the privacy issues, etc., with respect to algorithms.
Okay. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Just to keep it short, as moderator pointed out, that we'll be having an interactive session. So I'll just, in short, describe the issues that we will be touching upon in this discussion. So for this, we have 4 main issues with algorithms and that can be associated with algorithmic transparency. The first and foremost issue that we have is whether the algorithmic transparency it can increase privacy. Now, the question arises: how are algorithms and algorithmic transparency related to privacy of people? And if you've noticed, whenever you search Google, based on your history, it shows you targeted advertisements. So how does it do it? That is only because of the algorithms that are embedded behind them. So whenever you visit a page, it might contain cookies, or the cookies have all sorts of algorithms which then take use of the data that you have inputted, or the websites that you have visited, They track them, they make use of those data, they process them, and based on those processing, they show the topics of your interest, or maybe advertisements of your interest. So basically, these cookies, or the algorithms that are behind those cookies, they go into the details of the search results, the searches that you make, the websites that you visit, the data that you have entered. So they are keeping a track of whatever you are visiting. So in a way, they have been collecting all the data that are available there. Another example might be Facebook, which again keeps a track of all the activity that you do on the platform, and then shows targeted advertisements again, or maybe the topics of your interest. And hence you can see a pattern that they know your choice, that they know what ads you might like, the topics that you might be interested in discussing. So, but also you do not have an idea as to what the data is that they are collecting. So when you talk of Facebook, what is the data that they are sharing, that they are collecting to process that information, to show you your search result, targeted advertisements? So what is it? Is it your maybe just the profiles, the pages that you visit, or the friends that you have, or the status of the friends, that is socioeconomic status based on the places that they have visited? What exactly is the data behind it that they are processing, and what exactly is the data that they're collecting? That all encompasses the privacy of of an individual. So when we look at this, when they show you the targeted advertisements, they are taking information from you. You do not have control over, they do provide you control, but you have to be very aware as to what permissions are you giving them. So that also encompasses that privacy aspect. So you have to be very aware as to what information are you giving those sites, and what information are they taking, and in return, how are they processing it, in what method, what algorithms are they using it. So this all things are included in the algorithmic transparency. If the algorithm is transparent, you would know what data are they collecting and how are they processing it. Now the second concept that arises out of privacy is whether these companies, the advertisement companies, how are they bound to disclose the algorithms, or if they disclose these algorithms, will their interests be jeopardized? Because obviously, if you see that they have these companies, they have their commercial and financial interests linked to these algorithms, because they collect all those data and then they process it to sort of give you some targeted advertisement. So they have their commercial financial interests related to it. So are you sure? So how can you compel them to maybe make those algorithms available to you, publicly disclose? So there have from the point of end users, if you see, from the point of public interest, there are three most important in fact, three most important public interest figures who can actually benefit from the disclosure of these algorithms. First might be the end users, because if they know what information the algorithms are collecting from them, they will have more control over the information that they want to disclose. Then we can have the researcher community, because if they know that what is the information that the particular algorithm is being collected, then they can contribute to that algorithm to enable it to use less data to perform the same function that it had been doing, but with lesser information, and of course perform it efficiently. So the second might be researchers, and the third might be government, because in these cases then the government will understand wherein lies the liability of if in case these data are misused, or maybe some accident arises, for example in the case of self-driving cars. So if there an accident takes place, so where does the liability arise? Whom can we point out to? Will that be a particular person or the algorithm maker, or where? So it will in fact help the government as well. Now talking about the disclosure of the algorithms, that brings us to the next question, whether if the algorithms have to be disclosed, whether they have to be disclosed in those original without in that original code, or they may be just disclosed in the descriptive form, which is telling you what sort of information are they collecting and how exactly are they processing it, without going into the details as to how the code is made. So over there, if they are not disclosing because they usually consider it a trade secret, then they can opt for this, that instead of disclosing the actual code, they might go for basically explaining what sort of information are they using and how are they processing. That might also be beneficial. At least the user will know how is the data being collected and processed. Now, that also brings us to the next part that I had said, the part of liability. Very good example would be the self-driving cars that Google and the Uber are coming up with. So in these cars, suppose what if the algorithm that is there, it gets a bug and it malfunctions, and suppose an accident happens. So the problem therein with liability is who gets liable for the loss caused due to the accident? Will that be the person who made that algorithm, or will that be the person who manufactured the car and who employed that algorithm, or would that be the person who actually bought the car? So these are the questions that arise when we talk about algorithmic transparency. If we have transparency in algorithm, then at least the liability part would be clear. It would be easier for the government and for the other people to actually decide then if these circumstances arise, then who the person is who can be held liable for all these things. I think these are the most important points, and I'm sure my co-panelists will discuss into it and delve into it deeper and give us some clarity.
Thank you, Vaishali, for that great introduction. So you laid out the, major issues that we need to discuss in this panel, and that's very useful. Now, over to you, Rajat. See, we find that big data is everywhere. So our data is collected, everybody wants our data, whether it's the governments, whether it's this private corporations. So what do we do with this? About the kind of data that is collected, the algorithms that use these kind of data.
1 second. Can you go to the present? Okay. Great. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Rajat. I'm from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and I'm actually going to be using, sort of my bit today is going to be based off this amazing work done by a group from Yugoslavia. It's a research group that sort of come onto the scene last year called Share Labs. And I cannot stress enough how absolutely cool their work is. So please go to their website. Just FYI, we don't work with them, we don't partner with them, but their work is amazing, right? And also they have the best tagline ever, right? Isn't that just brilliant? Where indie data pop meets media theory pop to investigate digital rights blues. I think that is just brilliant, right? So let's get to it. Now, this is, of course, a part of their work called the Facebook Algorithmic Factory, right? Where they've looked at the way data collection. Oh, okay? Yeah, all right. They look at the way that sort of data collection happens. Now, they've created this massive image, sort of tracing the route of all the data that's collected from your actions and behaviors and social statuses and friends and so on and so forth of Facebook. I can't present that because, to be very honest, it's just too big, right? It's about 14,000 pixels tall, and I can't present that here. But just a snapshot, right? So when we talk about data collection, one of the things that they look at is something like actions and behavior. Now, maybe can we switch the lights off just a tiny bit, because unfortunately, this is, I'm so sorry, it's a little blurry, but I can read out a couple of things. Now, every action you take, like if you like something, or you share something, or you view a post, or you access a group, that's collected, right? So this is all your actions and behavior. This is a macro level image of what's collected. Now, let's go into a little bit of detail. When you post a link, when you edit a photo, when you post a photo, when you comment, when you say something, when you tag a photo, right? When you choose a location, when you share it, when you report a problem, when you block somebody, when you add a file, when you create a new page, all of that is collected as part of your action and behavior, right? There's a bit more. What all do you open? What all posts cause impressions? And very famously, we have the case of the US election from last year, where it is precisely because of this analysis of what do people click. People were able, content providers, and particularly fake news guys, were able to serve information to them, right? all of that leads to two sort of storage mechanisms. One is the action logger and one is the content logger. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to another one, your profile information, right? What is your status history? So all the statuses that you've posted since the dawn of time are recorded, right? Feeling happy, feeling sad, feeling, oh my God, so excited to be at APrIGF. Well, whatever, right? Any websites that you have, any URLs that are linked, right? Now this is where it gets a little scary. Your name, your mobile phone number, your address, your college, your high school, hometown, current city, your health and wellness related information, right? Have you posted about any weight loss, right? Recently. I haven't. If I stand up, you'll know immediately why. Right? If you've lost somebody recently, right? If you're in a new relationship, any life events, all of that is cataloged. And that goes into a profile store, right? Now, I've skipped ahead. These are the 4 key outputs, the 4 key sort of, well, inputs as well as outputs really. As actions and behavior, your social graph, your profile store, and your device information. Now, just again, a very small snapshot. This is from this massive image. I've just picked up a tiny bit. It's talking about targeting based on your demographics, right? Now again, your education, your ethnic affinity, are you African American, Asian, Hispanic? This is of course done predominantly from a US-based lens, but it still holds true no matter where you are. What generation are you from? Are you a millennial? Are you one of those, what's the word that they use for us? Privileged, overprivileged, hypersensitive millennials? No, we're not, right? Are you Generation X or are you something in between, right? Where do you live? Are you an expat, right? Where's your hometown? Where do you currently live? What are the life events you've had? Who are your parents? For the US, of course, what is your political affiliation and your relationships? It's great. Now, this is sort of at the really macro level. So I'm just going to go back for a tiny bit. And I want to point out a few things. Now, I come from a predominantly social science-led background where I have worked on exclusion as a predominant, and digital exclusion as a large part of my work. And I just want to put a question out there to everybody here, and of course to everybody on the panel, and I'm sure it'll get a great debate on, is when we talk about transparency surrounding algorithms, what is the responsibility that these institutions have to people who aren't necessarily digitally that literate, right? I come from India. We have a tremendous population that is connected via mobile phones, right? 70–75% as of last count. But, the World Development Report back in 2016 said, what was it? Yeah, 1.063 billion people are not connected to the internet in India, right? I mean, that's an incredible number because that's actually higher than the next 3 countries' offline population combined, right? So the question is now we can talk about algorithmic transparency. We can print out massive A0 sheets like how these guys would have with this flow chart of exactly what happens to your data. But how do we communicate that? And this is something that practitioners, I think academics, civil society people all across the world should try and maybe look into, is how do we exactly try and communicate information surrounding algorithmic transparency to people who are not just in the know, right, who are not slightly technically more capable or aligned, but also to people who have no idea what it's all about. Yeah? Thanks. I mean, just a couple of provocative questions to sort of get my own agenda up and running. But thanks so much. And sorry, yeah, last thing. Thanks. August.
Yeah. Thanks, Rajat. So we have a social science background, and now let's move to a little more geeky backgrounds. So I think we have Art here who has done a tremendous amount of work in this area, especially on the tech aspects of it and the ethical aspects of it. So over to you, Art.
Thanks a lot. I'm not that techy anymore. Well, to be fair, like I used to work in the area called like computational linguistics, like, but that's like a while ago. We have the word called like data intensive linguistics, right, where you have a lot of like user data sometimes, right, but mostly they are like text, right, or like sometimes voices, right, and you build a model of that, and the application is those like speech recognition, speech synthesis, automatic summarization, things like that. But that's quite a long while ago. I'm not really consider myself like that tech anymore. Anyway, now I'm working for an organization called Foundation for Internet and Civic Culture, and we focus on this like digital rights, privacy, data protection, freedom of expression online. So the thing that I'm going to does it work? The clicker? How to actually use this? See, I'm not that techy. It's.
Can you help him?
ขยับไหมครับ That's why I would just go there. Better. So this is the way we solve the problem. No? Okay. Sure. Should work, right? How this thing works. Okay. สวัสดีครับ You can hear it, right? Okay, sure. So because this kind of the thing that I'm not really that understand it yet, right? But have an interest. So just do the survey, right? Of why I have an interest in this transparency and accountability of algorithms, and in general, like the decision made by the machine based on data or whatever techniques. The main thing I have interest is the question of discrimination, right? And there's a term, say, for example, like data-based discrimination or data-driven discrimination. And this is and this kind of discrimination can be prevail, right, in society. Like it can be something about like whether you're going to get a scholarship or not, whether you get a loan, a grant, or housing, or jobs or not, right? Previously, companies, right, or enterprises, organizations, we can say that it's not that different, right? So when you're talking like when we have this panel, we talk it like this is kind of new thing, that the decision is made on data, computer make a decision on machine learning, artificial intelligence models, whatever, right? But I mean, sorry. But this has been happened in the past and currently as well. But probably it's not that like the software who read the data, but it's a human. So the discrimination that based on the data, it's already here, right, by the human. And by definition, to make a decision, it's to discriminate to some extent, right? But the problem that I think that this panel, I think, like going to be discussed in more detail. It's about the scale of it, right? Because in the past, yes, the decision is made on the data, but it's a smaller scale. When there's a machine make a decision, it can go to a much larger scale. And also, into the details, into the that, how to say, it's not that understandable by human anymore. So previously, yes, the discrimination may based on the data, but there are certain criteria, there are certain set of rules that written by human, so it's understandable by human when you do auditing, right? But when the discrimination is made by machine in some mathematical models, computational model, it's more difficult for human to understand it, to audit it, whether there's a discrimination or not. So I think that's the cut, right? We're not saying that like the discrimination that based on the data, it's never happened before. It always happened, right? But what we talk here is the scale, and difficult to do the audit, right? And it's not only about the machine alone or human alone. Sometimes this discrimination has been done hand in hand by the say like collaboration between machine and human, right? There's a cases. I take this one from the College of Journalism at the University of Michigan. So there's a research like a preliminary like a yeah kind of like a small scale like research there that just like make a quick search on the internet about the earning reports of different companies in stock markets, right? Because this report right, affects the people trust on those companies and it affects the share price of the company. But anyway, there's too many companies in the market, right? And it's expensive to actually generate these reports, to write this report by hand, by human. So there's a company using a concept of robot journalism or algorithmic journalism, right? To generate these earning reports based on the data, that, the structured data that's already available, right? So we have a software that reads the data from from this company reports, right, like electronically, and generate some articles, some narrative out of the database, basically, right? A quick search on Google, they found that there are thousands of earning reports that contain errors. And these make the human who read it have a wrong image of the company performance. Then it affects the share or the value, right? The shares of the company. So this is one of the examples, like how this can be addressed, and who's going to responsible for this, right? Or there are also a problem of like related to the discrimination, but this can be go more in the systematic way, right? Or up to even though even in the policy level. So there's a lot of times that the public policy, well, I mean, in the end, we kind of agree that like a good public policy should based on evidence. It should be evidence-based, right? When you make this like this policy that's going to affect public in general. But then again, there's a problem of over and under representation, right? This problem again happens well before this discussion of algorithms, right? But one of the things that we notice that there are more and more chances that the richer people will have ability to generate more data points and feed it into the public policy discussion or decision. Take like extreme example, hypothetical, right? That about making a policy of the public health care. Say right now, a lot of people have the device, right? That like a wristband, right? Like how we call that, like smartwatch, right? That can monitor your like blood pressure, whatever, heart rate, right? Say we take this data, right, to decide about the public health policy for whatever like reason. The question is like who can actually own these devices. So if it's only the richest people who can own these smart devices, and then this data has been used to make a public policy for the public health care, it means that there's a tendency that the public health policy will be skewed like towards the richer people. This is kind of extreme example, but it's possible like to happen. I'm going to wrap that. So I think that I'll just throw this kind of question. I actually don't have an answer, and it's not that like people like those like techies again, right? Probably this like I'll throw this further towards you. It's not that like programmers or software developers doesn't really aware of this. Association of Computing Machinery, right, ACM, actually aware of this, and they like earlier this year in January published 7 principles about the algorithmic transparency and accountability. You can search for this and read it in details. I'm going to end here that like we found that like many times, yes, we know there's a problem, and many times we try to a little bit fix it. Like some people talk about open source, the source code, right? But I like to stress that like open, like the transparency in the source code is not exactly equal to transparency in algorithm. Even you have the source code, it's still difficult to understand how it works. And the source code itself, it's not explain how the system works, because there's a data model as well that we don't understand. So it's not source code alone. There's a training model, or the trained model as well. So even it's not. I say that it's not only the source code; it's also the data model as well, right? So even we can specify, we can spot where is the problematic set of data that leads to discrimination. Even we know which set of data, it's still a question that how can we remove that set of data or influences from the model that has been already trained. Because nowadays the size of the model is very huge, and the way they train it is kind of accumulating a little bit, layer by layer, one by one, right? A little bit, and then so like if we know now that like the data that we added like 2 years ago actually problematic, how can we actually remove that without affecting the whole set of model? Yeah, because like to retrain everything from the scratch takes a lot of time, and it's not practical. And this is one of the reasons why companies are quite hesitated to actually remove or have an attempt to remove, because it takes time and effort to actually retain everything from the scratch. And yeah, I've ended here. Thanks.
Thank you, Art. Now, moving on to Virgil. See, I mean, we find that, for example, the kind of searches that we do on Google. There's a 2013 Harvard study which showed that if you're searching for a specific name which sounds African American, the ads that you get along with it could give suggestion that this person could have been arrested at some point of time or the other. And that could really create a problem if this person is, let's say, applying for a job. I mean, something you can think of various situations. So who is responsible for such issues? There is an ethics element also involved in it when private corporations work on these algorithms. Virgil has done, is currently doing, I would say, cutting edge research in this area, cutting edge work in this area. So, yeah, over to you, Virgil. I won't take more of your time.
Sure. So, hi, everyone. I only have, I guess, 4 things I think are useful for me to say. So I think the first one, so I work something called the Ethereum Foundation. We are the number 2 blockchain in the entire world, just behind Bitcoin. We do this thing called smart contracts, which you may have heard of. In short, sorry, it's kind of a difficult term, but in short, you have little open source programs that live in this cloud, and you can send little inputs into them. There's little outputs into them, and people like them because it's sort of it is forced transparency of algorithms, and people go, oh, that sounds like really nice. So unfortunately, you will not be able to run everything on Ethereum. Doing this kind of forced transparency is kind of expensive. But people are still really into this. So I guess we can give you, so platforms like Ethereum, we can give you enforced transparency, say for your finances or your simple contracts, yeah, things like that, or other sort of simple automated processes. So so that's good. So we can definitely get that. Another one, so we talked about a lot about getting corporations like Facebook and Google to open source their algorithms. I would be very, very, very surprised if we ever got that, because there's just so much money on the line. Really. Even if we all agree this was 100% a good idea, this is billions on the line. They're not gonna they're just not gonna do it. So what you could do to get them to do it So I guess you could try. So I guess you want to make the algorithms less valuable, so that if you publish them, the company doesn't lose so much. The most natural thing to do is that maybe you could say, oh, well, Google, you don't want to give us your latest and greatest, so maybe you could publish your old algorithms that are however many years old, and they'd probably say, oh, well, we've already gotten most of the value out of that, and most of our competitors will use something like this anyway, so they would be more comfortable publishing that. That's one thought. I mean, I could hypothetically imagine like the tech world not flipping out if you asked them to do that. Another way it could be that a government could just pay them to release their algorithms. I mean, this sounds kind of weird for there being a wealth transfer from a government to a tech company like this, but I mean, they did the R&D, but they would say, we want to be reimbursed for this R&D, and the government says, well, you know what, transparency is worth it. Here's a big wad of cash. Hey, that could work. I guess it depends how much this is really worth to us. There's one other thing. There's a technique called anti-conditioning, which I feel like a lot of people don't know about. So basically, this means to tell you that mathematically this is not all lost. Is there a way for me to get a notepad or something? I guess I can do it over there. Well, all right. Well, no, I'll tell you about it. Basically, there's this way you can do forced independence of a variable. So how the probability of A given B, where the given means B. There's this opposite one called anti-conditioning, where you force ignorance of B. So if there's any correlation in B, you sort of remove it. And this one common way you can think about these things, say, oh, well, we have, say, these protected classes. And you something like, oh, say, be like race, religion, sex, whatever. And we can say, oh, okay, hey, tech companies, by law, we're going to force you to decorrelate from those variables. This obviously will reduce the efficacy of their algorithms, and that will make them upset. But I mean, I guess you would tell them just to suck it up. I guess I'd be kind of curious how much the quality of services would actually go down if we did that. That'd be really unfortunate if they went really down. I guess we would find out. Yeah, so I don't know, I guess that's mostly it. I don't know if you're interested. If you want to increase transparency in things, probably the best game in town is probably this blockchain related work. Not everything on a blockchain has to be transparent, but a lot of it is. It just kind of dovetails with it very naturally. So if you want to make more transparent things, maybe tell all your friends to do blockchain stuff. And if you're a techie, we can talk to you about that. I can do that on Ethereum. If you're a non-techie, we aren't ready for you yet, and you should come talk to us in about 2 years. I'm done.
Thanks, Virgil. Okay, now out to Jyoti. Jyoti has done a great amount of work in the area of intermediary liability. So that was an area where the question was whether intermediaries like, let's say, Google or Facebook could be held liable for content that you or I posted online. That is the third-party content. But here, we are into a tricky area where we are talking about liability of work or let's say, their own product, how it works, the algorithms that they have made, the decisions made by these algorithms. For example, like Vaishali suggested, what happens when a self-driving car crashes? Can the company be held liable for it? Over to you.
Thank you, Prashant. Hi, so I will be covering transparency and accountability from two perspectives. I want to first focus on intermediary liability issues, but looking at the data models that one of my panelists mentioned. And I want to introduce something called data provenance, which refers to it's an idea of where description of the way the training data is collected should be maintained by the builders of algorithms, accompanied by exploration of biases introduced by the data gathering process. And I think this particular notion is really at the core of understanding how do we assign liability, because as many of the panelists have stated, that public scrutiny of the data will provide maximum opportunity for scrutiny of how these processes work and how they impact users. This leads on to the other issue, which is audibility and how these models and algorithms, data and the decisions being taken by them should be recorded and made available to the public or interested stakeholders who want to assess the impact. And this is, of course, linked to the notion of companies improving their validation and testing processes and introducing more public scrutiny. So at the moment, what most of the conversation gets limited to is concerns over privacy or trade secrets or the revelation of analytics. Say, for example, companies will often claim that if we put it out there how our analytics is being done, then malicious actors can probably game the system and can that would impact users and the security of the systems. But again, I think there is some benefit in breaking down the various steps involved in the algorithmic decision making, because it's, while we think of it as just one singular concept, it is actually tiered and layered, and introducing accountability and transparency and thorough documentation, which is again open to public scrutiny at each of the levels, I think is a very important aspect. The other point that I want to stress is that introducing transparency in algorithms is also leading to a really interesting development in privacy law. So, for example, I don't know if many of you know about the GDPR, but the GDPR, which comes into effect, it's between the EU and the US, and it comes into effect in 2018. But it's got a provision for something called the right to explanation, using which users can seek an explanation of algorithmic decision making, or under this right, the law gives users the rights to seek an explanation of how the algorithm made a certain decision about them. And while we see introduction of such provisions in legal frameworks such as the GDPR, it is also really interesting to see the counter movement to it from the company's perspective, which is where they are pushing for prohibitions on disclosure of source code. And I think that's something that we as civil society, academics, and people working in this sphere really need to pay more attention to, because while most of these conversations take place at forums or platforms such as this, source code prohibitions are actually entering trade agreements. So we can potentially have a scenario where the EU and the US have now established this right to explanation, but companies can go via the trade route path and actually get, or the bilateral trade agreement route, and actually ensure that nations or governments cannot seek a disclosure of source code. And of course, that would impact all of the data models and the data provenance and the audibility issues that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, those are the two things that I really wanted to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. See, we are in a state where, like, for example, Facebook conducted a research in what they call a research. I'm not very sure whether we can use that term, in 2014, where they tried to find out whether they could change the emotions of people, make people sad or happy by altering their newsfeed. There were like quite a lot of protests about the way they did it, but that's the kind of power that these social media organizations and others, the bigger companies, have. They can change the way you feel. They can change the way you vote. So this is something that we need to discuss in depth, and I have there are a lot of brilliant minds here. I don't want to restrict the discussion to the panel here. So I would suggest feedback, suggestions, questions from you. Over to you. Questions? Sadish. Yeah. If you could just introduce and then affiliation also. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
I think. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, yeah.
We can.
My name is Satish. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. My name is Satish. I'm from India, and I work with ICANN as a volunteer. I have 3 quick incidents to raise here. The first one is a very offensive 2015 incident that happened with Google Photos. An African-American couple was auto-tagged as gorilla. Now, we wonder whether this is caused by a lack of diversity in the development team or the testing team or what. The second incident has to do with surge pricing in Uber or one of those ride-hailing companies. It turns out that one specific algorithm, the path of the algorithm, when it was late night, low battery, low network, and a woman passenger, it automatically kicked into surge pricing. So sensing the vulnerability of the person concerned, it automatically kicked into surge pricing. The third is more of a buzzkill. A man searches for an engagement ring and chooses one online in a computer that is shared with his SO. And for the next 2 days, every web page it opens with an ad for that particular engagement ring. And that's kind of, there is no more suspense there, and her partner also knows what it is about. Now, what it raises, as far as I'm concerned, is a social obligation and responsibility. And if, at least as open source, we as a community can, in some sense, either audit or participate in some of this algorithmic decision making. Because many of these are very large companies like Facebook or Google. What is does the user have any role at all in any of these processes? Thank you.
Just to add to the examples that Satish sir gave, in 2015 we had 2 experiments which were conducted, and in one of those it was observed that when people used to search for jobs on the Google, males were shown ads with higher paying managerial jobs, while their female counterparts were shown the less paying job. And that was mostly because the AI of the algorithm behind it assumed from the learning from the data that females were generally at lower income jobs employed in the society, and therefore it used to show them a lower paying job instead of the higher paying job. Equal opportunity were denied to them. So I think that is one more case of algorithm being biased. It can learn from the behavior of the society. Please, sir.
Sorry, just to add, actually, this situation like this is much older than most of us also imagine, because early to mid 90s, you had what was the broken window policing policy in some of the major cities in the US, which sort of assumed that if there was a higher percentage of broken windows in a particular neighborhood, crime incident rates were higher, therefore extra policing is required. And that sort of led to this vicious circle of being naturally sort of biased towards certain groups and minorities within the US. A great example, and by the way, there's this amazing book that's come out rather recently called The Weapons of Math Destruction. Right. I'd highly recommend that you pick that up, because it's got a couple of really interesting stories from, again, back through the 80s and the 90s, looking at even something like university rankings and how, and this is a question, so I have a vague background as a psychologist somewhere in my past. So this is where a question surrounding behavior comes into play, is that how algorithms can also affect and sort of bias the behavior of individuals. So the university rankings that I was referring to over here, and I'll give you the name later, is a prime example, because it incentivized schools to conduct certain infrastructure building activities or focus on certain metrics as opposed to others. So it's just another question and something for us all to consider over here.
Virgil, do you have a response? Since this, especially the example that Satish gave about Uber, it raises serious questions, because considering the vulnerability of the person if you hike the rates. So that again is not just an algorithmic question; it's also an ethics question.
Sure. I mean, I actually don't have much opinions. Okay, so we do know. I mean, this was a nice study. So it was something like, so an iPhone app can know what the current battery is, and they often want to know this so they can like give you like a low power version of the app. So in this case, Uber found through their own independent research that unsurprisingly, if you have very little battery, you are willing to pay more. Which makes sense. So it's unclear. I'm not aware of any evidence that they're actually using this information, but it's merely that they've shown that they could. I do know there is one on the flip side. There actually is one that I do know they are currently using. It's called like location-dependent pricing, something like that. So you have two like condominiums like right next to each other. One's like super expensive, the other's like not so expensive. They will charge you more if you're going to the more expensive one. And they just have to say, well, I mean, if you're going there, you probably have more money, and therefore you're probably willing to spend more. I don't know. So these may not all be incredibly terrible for society.
To add on this, I just talked with you on this. It's like this pricing strategy. It's not that new again, right? I just gave him an example of like the same spec of phone, right?
No, mine's much better. Look how thin it is.
Okay, the same spec of phone, no. Like say Android one and like iOS one, right? Even you have the same spec. Why Apple can sell it in a much more expensive?
Have you not seen the logo? It's very shiny.
Right, because it's really shiny, and people willing to pay, right? So in this case, I'm actually not. I mean, if in this case it's a public transportation, right, and people really have to rely on it, I think that's a really serious problem. But then, in the area that like, it's not, how to say, people life doesn't really depends on it. Having a heavy regulation, I'm not sure, because it may have other unintended consequences, or the cost of the regulation itself may surpass the thing that the public can have it back. So I think we should be aware as well. I'm not saying this is a good idea, right? That you discriminate the price, right? But the case of Uber, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's it.
I like the idea of charging the iPhone users more for using Uber. I mean, that could be really nice. That's a really good idea. I mean,
Over to you, Sunil.
I mean, they've shown they're okay with it.
So it's a question for Virgil.
Again? Sure. What's on your mind?
If we manage to get what we want, that is, regulators demand transparency of source code, data models, or alternatively source code audits.
Yeah.
How can we be sure that the source code that has been disclosed is the same source code that is running?
Yeah, the answer that you probably, okay, so there actually are ways you could do this. But it's tricky. So there are some things called okay, the most common one, it's called Intel SGX, where you can like run a piece of code inside like a little box, and as long as you don't have a clean room, you can verify. I mean, so a clean room where you break apart.
Could you explain? Could you also explain what a clean room is?
Oh, a clean room. It's from chemistry. Anyway, no, it's. Okay, when you have very sensitive electronics, very tiny little stuff in the air will like make it not work. So usually if you want to like do surgery on like a chip, you have to have a clean room. And so there are ways that you can like run things inside of a little trusted box, and those are shipping on a lot of modern Intel CPUs, the little trusted box, like the high-end ones. It's called the Intel SGX. You can hack it if you have a clean room, but a clean room is like a maybe like $10 million investment, and like it's kind of a lot of money, right? So I think the short answer is you can't. So you can't actually know this is actually what they're doing. I guess you would say, hey, if you lie to us, we'll be really upset with you, and you hit him. It's like you hit him with like a really big stick. I mean, a lot of regulators have this issue where they have like one weapon, and it's like the nuclear weapon, and so as a result, they're very reluctant to use it, but they always have it. And so, you know, you just kind of like hold it over them and say, you know, if you don't, you know, play nice, you know, the bomb will come. And usually they play nice. Because, I mean, because, you know, sometimes the bomb drops and they get really upset when that happens. But yeah, so in short, there's no way you can really enforce it. The closest things are probably the Intel SGX and just having like $1 billion penalty for lying.
I didn't understand. What would the SGX, how would you do it?
I
Once
see.
the code
I
is
see. So
disclosed, you load it onto the SGX?
Yeah, so, okay, let me try to get this right. Okay, I'm not actually an expert in the system. Right? How does it go? It goes something like, you can verify a piece of code was run on the SGX, and you can get the hash of that code. So if they published the algorithm, you could say, okay, what is the hash of this algorithm? And then the SGX would say, oh, I confirm it was code with this hash that was run. You could do something like that. I mean, again, I mean, if it's like a multi-billion-dollar thing, I mean, they would still. I mean, it costs more than that. It takes to get a clean room. But like most things, like anything that's not like really important.
Yeah, so I heard like governments and accountability, so that's kind of an oxymoron. How can we get around that, like without using governments? I mean, there was suggestions about asking governments to pay, but we can't even get governments to provide us the basics.
Do a Kickstarter.
Yeah. So you see this in the food value chain too, you know, processed food, we know you're supposed to have standards and all that, but that never gets regulated. We don't know what we eat. So I don't, maybe thinking in a different way how we can socially engage in doing this. And then why do we expect artificial intelligence to be unbiased when human beings themselves are biased?
I can do a little bit of the second, right? and I don't know, I stealing from you, but also this probably related to the question that Sunil asked as well about the source codes and things like that. So we have three parts at least to my understanding here, right? The input part, the say like black box sometime part, right? The processing part, say the middle at the middle, and then the output part, right? In the input part, right, data protection say that, like, I mean, if the data is sensitive, right, it shouldn't be collected from the first place if it's avoidable, right? And in the middle part, right, we asking like, okay, please open the source code, please like explain that how it works, the algorithm, whatever, right? Which then in this situation, very difficult. Right, so then there's the last part, the output part, and this is what the FTC just has just made a suggestions, like, I think just this year, that they understand that like to auditing, to the audit on the middle part, right? This processing is really going to be very difficult. But what you can do is that like the company who responsible enough should set some like scoring models, right, or criteria, whatever, and do monitor the results that generated, right, from the algorithm, and see if the discrimination actually happens or not, right, and try to fix it from that. Because the middle part is very difficult, but like to monitor the discrimination at the result part, the end part, the third part, it's maybe like more feasible.
Sure.
Actually, go ahead.
Okay, so regarding your first part, the question that you said, not involving the government, I think as Virgil has also rightly pointed out that it is very difficult for these companies, the big organizations, for example, Google and Facebook, to actually get their source code or their algorithms to have them displayed publicly or to open source them, for example. Because they have a lot of money, their commercial and the financial interests lie there. There are billions, as he said, billions on the line. So I don't think that without having some concrete legislation or maybe some government intervention, we can have them disclose their algorithms. So.
Can we get Coca-Cola to give the recipe?
I think that is more complicated here than that.
No, and this is why transparency and accountability actually different thing, right? We cannot ask Coca-Cola to give their recipe, but if their recipe cause public health problems, issues, they should accountable for that. Then again, right? Even though we cannot really understand the algorithm, the middle part, right? But if the result cause some problem, the company should accountable for that. And this is what we're asking for at the very least.
The question is, what's at least the minimum steps that we can have to avoid harm? At least that should be the key word, at least to avoid harm. Valentina?
Okay, so three things. Algorithms discriminate, and they discriminate heavily on gender and race. This is out of the question. I agree that we cannot get the recipe, but if we get indigestion, if we feel bad, that they have to be responsible. They cannot continue to play the argument of being the pipes. They are not the pipes. But I'm also wondering, there is a lot of algorithm that is used for groups of people that really has no decision making in the actual risk. I talk about migrants, displaced, refugees. All the UN circus is using Google, Facebook to provide internet to refugees, migrants, and those people are really fighting for their life. And they provide all the data that then are used against them and discriminate them and profile them. So I would like to know how we can push all this UN, all this organization that work for the interest of people to be aware that they are using a weapons that is killing the people that have the mandate to protect. For the third thing is, I think that we need also to build up maybe a smaller but an infrastructure that is safer and that its own, that is built on transparency and accountability, as the blockchain had shown it could exist. Because it's clear that for very sensitive information and data, if we want to empower people, we need to have our own algorithm. Because we can look at the result and monitor and pressure, but we really need also to create information and data and knowledge that is based on an algorithm that is at least less biased.
Rajat, would you like to take that?
That's well, I definitely think that your point, Val, about the issues surrounding the blockchain, I think that I'll defer to our resident expert over here. But no, I meant Virgil. I meant Virgil.
No, sorry, so wait.
I'll pass that along to you in a second. Yeah, I definitely agree that this is something that, I mean, even beyond migrants or refugees, this is something that you could even sort of find a parallel in rural India or rural Pakistan, or even to a certain extent, I would even say, rural USA, the belt, the Bible Belt of the US, because you have people who, may not be as empowered to understand the implications of the data and the interactions and the transactions that they're having online. I'll quote an example. One of my colleagues used to work for management consulting before he joined the foundation, and one of the clients that he was working with, they had an A0 sheet in a double imperial sheet of the tiny, tiny size 11 font of the exact workflow of one of their key algorithms, right? And that's not, and they said that this is the simplest way that we can do it. Like, we cannot simplify it further. So I definitely agree that this is a huge challenge, and this is something that I also pointed out. How do you communicate something like this? How do you make people aware? Now, I know that I think it was myshadow.org, the tactical tech project, did a great thing of trying to cull the keywords from terms of services, right? But I think the last time that they updated that was maybe end of 2015. So maybe sort of reinvigorating that
But
to a certain extent would
binding
be really great.
the UN to be faithful to their mandate?
No,
and
I
all
mean,
the big
I would.
NGOs?
So the thing is that, I mean, we can be. So I mean, this is where I'll probably get lynched outside. But this, I mean, we can be extremely idealistic, and we can say that no, we can shift altogether. But when we consider individuals who have low digital literacy to begin with, right? We cannot just ask them to shift onto platforms such that are dependent on open source platforms like the blockchain or DuckDuckGo. I think would be an excellent place that you can use for search, right? We can't immediately ask them to do that. There has to be that sort of, shoehorning in, right? So I'd say that yes, we have to acknowledge the importance and the sort of role that these larger, more proprietary platforms play. Wow, that was an alliteration. Try to say that like 5 times loud and really fast. That's not going to be easy. Proprietary platforms play. Okay. We have to acknowledge that, but we have to push for greater transparency at 2 ends. Of course, one is, their back end, which is something that, and everyone here will anyway be talking about, but also in terms of, what they put out, their terms of service. That has to be, I think it was Chinmay or somebody mentioned 83 days is what it'll take for you to read it, or Malvika on day 0, right? You have to be able to cull out the important bits from that and be able to explain, this is the implication that what you do has on your profile online. Virgil, I think maybe this is something you want to take on issues surrounding the blockchain and how that can help.
Yeah, I don't know. So people talk about blockchain things. In short, blockchain gives you a way where you have forced transparency of very simple programs. And so I guess the more things in our world that are simple, the more we can make them transparent, and that would be a good thing. That doesn't give anyone like internet or anything, but it gives you something. Especially true for things like finance, because those are actually surprisingly simple. I don't think it actually solves her concerns, but I don't know. But it's something. It's something, and a lot of this is kind of like doom and gloom, but we could have like one good thing. So hooray! Right? Is there more?
Sorry, there's one question over here.
I have 2 questions on the extreme. One is like most of the protection. My name is Ed Legaspi. I am from Southeast Asian Press Alliance based in Bangkok. How effective really are those? This is a small question. How effective really are those individualized measures that you can take? Use DuckDuckGo, turn off use incognito mode, those things. Again, in fighting that at an individual level, and at the bigger, from a bigger perspective, what would you suggest would be the way to advocate against these things, or for more transparency on these things? Because human rights, I'm a human rights advocate. We have this very lame business and human rights responsibilities. Clearly, if you think about it even from a budget perspective, Facebook might be even bigger than the United Nations, right? And they're certainly more powerful than many of our governments. And it upends, for example, the direction of these so-called standards, because you were talking about influencing decisions, not impact, right? So where do you think advocacy on this matter should go, especially for EFF?
I'll try to attempt an answer, though. To be perfectly honest, I don't speak for EFF. So many of the questions, can we ask Coca-Cola to give up their formula? I think for algorithms, it's not as simple. GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, are huge. And one thing that we can probably count on is that they would want market access, they want more profits, and this is where national sovereigns probably become more relevant than the ITU or the UN frameworks, because again, there is funding issues, there is also a knowledge gap. So UNESCO has really stepped up efforts in the past 1.5 years. They've been organizing a series of workshops and talks on algorithmic accountability. From what I also understand, it's one of their major themes going forward from 2017 to 2020, that they would be getting into machine learning and algorithmic accountability. So while we should look at UNESCO and those measures probably as more intervention from improving knowledge on these issues, I think in terms of actually exercising control on these large platforms that now are the face of algorithmic decision making would probably come from national governments and market access and competition rules. And so advocacy again would probably need to look at the different areas that these companies are pushing for rules to protect their sovereignty over their algorithms, and where the tension between national sovereignty and company sovereignty plays out. Because, and also kind of empowering users. So for example, how do we go about pushing these large companies to provide redress for individual users? Or, I mean, the right to explanation is the perfect kind of development in this scenario where two large blocks are kind of trying to gain control over this. I don't have an easy answer. I hope that was helpful.
We have a question from a remote participant. That's Yanisa from Thailand. The question is, will Internet of Things, that's IoT, help to reduce the social disparity in for the governments in collecting data? I think Art earlier mentioned smart watches and Fitbits, so I think you can relate it to that.
And I already speak about that, right? So, yes and no, right? I mean, so I mean, it's not the data collection itself, right? I mean, the more data we have, yes, of course, it's possible to be the better, right? But then again, as I mentioned earlier, where those data come from, which social groups, right? The data that's collected from, or which kind of data has in the end has been used in the decision making. I think that's a problem. So it's not only about the collection of data. It's not about the quantity. Like let's be like cliche now, right? It's not only about the quantity, right? But it's like where this data come from, or how this is like sensitive data that shouldn't be collected in the first place. How you going to use that for the decision? I think that's it's more about that. But of course, like if those like IoT, Internet of Things devices is like cheap enough, and in the end we can say that it can help us to have a better public policy. Yeah, of course we should go for that. But we should like settle down first, like how, like in terms of regulatory transparency, accountability, like because the thing is that like this Internet of Things is like once you install it, once you deploy it, it's going to be very difficult to upgrade it, right? Many times once it's deployed, it's there, and data is collected forever. So I think like we should be quite certain a little bit before actually deploy this. Yep, thanks.
Yeah. I will also be worried about IoTs and the surveillance part. Well, that's a different issue for a different discussion. Yeah, Vidushi, your question. If you could just.
Hi, I actually have two questions for Virgil. Yeah, for I have two questions for you.
I'm so sorry.
No, I kind of interrupted your conversation. So the first is when we say like we can't fully understand models with respect to algorithms and data sets and stuff. I just want to unpack that a bit, because for example in some techniques used in machine learning, for example in supervised and unsupervised learning, we know for a fact that there's always a human sort of guiding what the machine does, in the sense that you decide the attribute that you train on, and you decide the data that you give it, and you decide the algorithmic model. But my question specifically, my first question to you is, what is the level of predictability we have in neural networks? Like, if we were to ask the question of what do we know for sure when it comes to using a neural network, what would the answer look like? And the second question I have for you is with respect to fairness. So a lot a lot of policy and legal discussion around algorithmic transparency says that we want fairness in AI or in machine learning. But I'm wondering what that looks like to someone who actually develops those systems. So do you just, do you say, okay, if A asks for something and B asks for something, we won't discriminate based on X, Y, Z? Is that what fairness looks like? I know these are little impossible questions, but I think you might be best placed.
Okay, I can give you some answers, but I'm not sure they'll be very satisfying. So the first one was, what do we know about neural networks? How can we characterize them? So we just by knowing it's a neural network, we actually know very little. So a 3-layer neural network is something called Turing complete, which means it can execute any function you want it to. So just knowing that it's a neural network actually tells you very little. So you know that's that. The next question was, sorry, what was it? Sorry, there was more.
The second was on fairness in machine learning.
Yeah, yeah. People define fairness really differently. So the classic one, so and the one I really like to use is with predicting violent crime. So violent crime, I mean, men commit like what, 90% something like that, maybe even higher. So when you say fairness when it comes to detecting violent crime, should you spend 90% of your resources investigating men, or should you spend it 50-50 between men and women? Or should you spend it 33 between men, women, and ladyboys? I mean, and people would say, oh, that sounds really weird. And you're like, well, I thought we were being fair. And, in general, people, fairness is kind of like justice. Like, we all know we're in favor of justice, but we don't really know what justice is.
So I guess the reason I asked you that is to understand what is actually more helpful from a legal or policy point of view. Like if we're developing standards, instead of saying fairness, what is a more accurate, helpful term to use?
I would probably give an example. That's probably what I would do. So in the male-female example in committing crimes, say, oh, do you want that to be split 50-50, or do you want to be like true Bayesian, where you quote, where you just do like exactly what the numbers say. So if it actually says, oh, men typically commit this crime more, we should spend more resources on men, something like that. So the closest thing I know, so there is a way that you can enforce. You can enforce it being uniform based upon some classification. So like if you want to spend, so say regardless what the data said, you said no algorithm, you're always going to make it 50-50 between men and women. So the anti-conditioning thing I mentioned before can give you that. If you want to, I can show you how that works. The math is actually kind of interesting. But I don't know. I mean, I actually don't know if anyone actually uses that. But I've heard like stats people talk about this is a way how you could implement this.
Thank you.
Thank you to the panel. Al Alegre from the Philippines FMA. I have a comment and a question, maybe for Jyoti.
Hi.
First is, I don't know if it is so yesterday, but I think part of the big picture of algorithms is another big picture of big data. And I don't think, at least in my experience, we've had enough public policy discussions about big data and its premises and its impacts. For example, it's not just a privacy issue, it's also Monsanto or Big Agri buying up all the data analytics companies for their purposes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if big data is the fuel of algorithms, but maybe that's one point of attack that we have public policy considerations seriously, which I don't think, at least in my country, has not yet been had on big data. The question is more on, it's in the vein of Ed, of advocacy attack, but it's also from the comment of Jyoti, where she said that, the right to explanation, etc. So legally, my question is the strategy, is the battle now a legal battle, and is that legal battle an IPR battle, meaning the Coke example, meaning should we look at this as a copyright thing versus a transparency. So is it a legal battle? Is it an antitrust battle, as you sort of referred to when we go to national sovereigns? Because it will have to be national context that determine that battle, right? Is it a standards battle? Meaning, I don't know what IETF or whatever, I'm not a technical guy, but are there some openings within the standards process? This is what I know. I know that when we were doing encryption, the NSA penetrated IETF and the standards body because they thought that they could influence the discourse through standards. Code is law, right? So is it also a standards battle in this sense? So I'm just trying to be where, like Ed is saying, out of the box, where do we wage these battles? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Your question actually has the answer in it. Fortunately, unfortunately, the battle is really fragmented. So in a sense, this is problematic because some of the issues are really connected, as you rightly pointed out, and because of the fragmented approach, it's very difficult to gain consensus or to collaborate or bring in resources to tackle the problem at hand. What is also happening is that, so let me give you an example. For example, when we say e-commerce and something, just not algorithms, when we say e-commerce, the interpretation of e-commerce itself is very different for depending on who is talking about it. Stakeholders, users views a topic like e-commerce differently. For governments, their priorities for e-commerce are different, and obviously companies view e-commerce as their business models. If we take that same notion and apply it to something like algorithms, again, every aspect of it is important in my view, whether it is the standards, whether it is the back end, whether it's the source code, whether it is governments pushing for antitrust or competition, or whether it is regulating market access by saying that, you know, we make these large companies more accountable and transparent. I think the battle for advocacy is on different fronts, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because given how complex this issue is, it is actually important that we tackle it from different layers. You rightly mentioned that standards organization might be the more obvious point of intervention, but there is a huge problem of really getting integrated into those standards mechanisms and how they work, which takes a longer time. For the public and for public facing issues, for example, where biases are concerned, taking a more big data or actually case study analysis of how these decisions are impacting users' rights and how they can open up their perception of viewing this problem from a more personal connect might also be helpful. So again, there is no right way, but yeah, you are correct that it is fragmented.
For sure, privacy is the main battle here, but yeah.
So we are running out of time. We'll take last two questions from Smaila and Gilbert. So if you could have the questions, we'll let the panelists answer both together. Smaila, you. Okay, fine. Yeah, Gilbert, yeah. Go ahead, Gilbert.
Gilbert from Affect Southeast Asia and Center Law Philippines. I just have two comments. Actually, first is, I think the problem or the challenge with algorithmic transparency is in some contexts, it might even infringe on privacy. For example, encryption, data encryption. And for example, like very specific example, Line, WhatsApp, it's being used in security sensitive countries such as Vietnam, for example. So it might be used by governments as a backdoor. In fact, if you look at the extremes, if you have a government that's not technically knowledgeable, so it's useless to have algorithmic transparency. If you have a government that's really very knowledgeable technically, they make use a backdoor, such as the US. Secondly, I think regulation can also be used for the public interest without really looking at the algorithm, but rather at the input and the output. as what our panelists have, some of our panelists advocated. For example, the FCC in the US, they're advocating for net neutrality, and they've regulated it for the public interest. Thank you.
One last question here, so then we'll wrap it up.
Very brief. I just want to respond to some comments on the UN agency's initiative. As a very brief, first, in June, there's Artificial Intelligence Summit organized in Geneva, with a dozen of UN agencies joined to reflect on the ethical dimension of the automated decision-making process, like algorithm, etc. And second initiative that in February, UNESCO organized event on the journalism under fire to explore that, because now the algorithm is also taking over the journalism activities. So we are very concerned about the human rights implication of algorithm in terms of free expression, privacy, etc. And thirdly, on the humanitarian activities conducted by the UN agencies, from last December, it was led by UN Global Pulse, and we had also maybe 20 UN agencies joined together to work on a UN-wide privacy and data protection framework to make sure that all the humanitarian activity which will have the ethical dimension applied. Lastly, and in the Council of Europe, in Europe, they have commissioned a very comprehensive study about the implications of the algorithm. I think it will be finalized later this year.
Thank you. We had great participation from the floor. And I'm sorry if we have like more questions than answers towards the end of the session, but that's how the topic is, and that let the debate go on. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Something like that. I imagine that. I mean, the obviously algorithms are going to change, you know, once in a while. So you have to pay them multiple times, which is annoying. But I mean, the idea of writing them like, you know, $100 million check, that's something obviously disgusting. Like, basically, yeah. I mean, no, I understand their position. They're like, nah, man, we did like $1 billion of research on this. Like, we're not going to give this out to all of our enemies. And you say, yeah, I understand.
How much money they will